Okay, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Thanks a lot, all of you, for coming here today to listen to me. Okay, so today I'm going to talk a bit about REvil. I think many of you already know what is this group, because recently we saw quite a few really high-profile attacks performed by these Ransomware-as-a-Service affiliates. So today we are going to talk about a bit on their recent tactics, techniques, and procedures, and of course about the group, if we can call it like this, of course, itself, and of course about some things that may help you to defend your company or, for example, your clients from REvil and from other affiliates of different ransomware-as-a-service programs, as many of them share various TTPs. And we can even build some kind of unified ransomware kill chain. So my name is Alex Kulkin. I'm deputy head of DFIR team here at Group IB. And today I'll be a presenter. Okay, I think we can start. And let's start from some general things, and let's start from how this group's name should be pronounced, actually. For example, recently, Peter McKenzie of Sophos even created a poll on Twitter where he asked various security analysts and just his followers, how should we pronounce the name of the group? And the funny fact is that the winning answer is REvil, but in fact, the group or this Ransomware-as-a-Service program, it should be pronounced as REvil, because even their representatives, I think many of you heard about unknown moniker that the Ransomware-as-a-Service runners use on various underground forums like XSS or Exploit. They give an interview to a small YouTube channel, a small Russian YouTube channel, where they explained how they came to an idea to name their product and their Ransomware-as-a-Service program as REvil, because they were inspired by Resident Evil, and REvil means ransomware evil. So the proper answer here is REvil, but nonetheless, as there are some different opinions and various security researchers, I think if you name them like REvil or maybe Sodinakibi, it's okay as well. So some general information about Ransomware-as-a-Service program. In fact, everything started in April 2019, when they first advertised their ransomware on underground forums. Some researchers consider them a rebrand of other ransomware family that was called GandCrab, and which was distributed via same way, like Ransomware-as-a-Service. But according to REvil representatives on the same underground forums, they say that they just bought source codes from GandCrab, and they were affiliates of GandCrab, and they finally decided to quit because that Ransomware-as-a-Service called it quit, and they decided to start their own business and start their own Ransomware-as-a-Service program using those codes. But of course, they updated it, and they still keep updating. Usually, the owners of Ransomware-as-a-Service program receive up to 25% from ransom paid. This amount may vary. Of course, for example, for high-profile cases, they may get less. Then they can help their affiliates with payments, with negotiations. So depending on how much they involved in the affiliate operation, they may receive various percentage from a ransom paid. And of course, as they have a lot of affiliates, and again, according to their representatives on the forums, they had up to 60 affiliates at a time. So there is quite a lot of people. So they are of really, really different skill sets. And that's why they attack various companies. It may be even small business, medium business, and of course, real giants like Acer, like Honeywell, and their recent attack against Kaseya's clients. So they may ask for 100,000, or they can ask up to 70 million. It depends on the victim, of course. And if we are talking about this year the affiliates performed at least 100 of attacks. Again, it's based on our incident response engagements and based on public information that's published on, for example, the DLS or data leak site. But in reality, we suppose that there are much more attacks performed, much more than 100. So because they have quite a lot of various affiliates, the attacks are quite sophisticated. For example, recent attack against Kaseya, they asked for 70 millions in BTC. In fact, they asked it in Monero, as far as I know. I don't know why they published this information, their data leaks site, and 70 millions is in BTC. But anyway, they used zero-day vulnerabilities in internet-facing Kaseya VSA servers. And in fact, it was a supply chain attack that is quite sophisticated. Again, as they earn quite a lot. For example, recently they also attacked GBS, and they received 11 millions as a result of this attack. So they have really good capabilities to pay, for example, to various researchers who are trying to find vulnerabilities in applications that they're interested in, and most of the time they are interested in some applications that, which are public facing. Back in the day, many of the affiliates attacked Pulse VPN, and they got into many really big companies and earned quite a lot for these attacks. And so here it was a supply chain because they got access to zero-day vulnerabilities. It allowed them to push a malicious hotfix to Kaseya VSA servers, so they were able to disable antivirus software and deploy a piece of ransomware. In fact, it was not the first supply chain attack. Of course, it's the first really, really big supply chain attack. But back in the day, again, as far as I remember, in 2019, they already performed a supply chain attack. They compromised Italian WinRAR websites, and they distributed REvil ransomware using the install of WinRAR on that website. Again, if we are talking about MS, they attacked various MSPs back in the day, and they already used Kaseya console to access MSP clients and move laterally and distribute ransomware. Again, if we are talking about this attack against Kaseya, an important fact, they didn't perform any post-exploitation activities like deploying some post-exploitation frameworks like Cobalt Strike or Metasploit. They just pushed ransomware, and there were no lateral movement, no additional implants, deployment, etc. So it's a bit different than most of their current attacks. Talking about MSPs, it's quite common for some of their affiliates, because it's quite logical to attack an MSP, because many MSP have various clients, and threat actors, especially those involved in ransomware attacks, they can just use it as a base to then move laterally to MSP clients and lock their networks. So, for example, they attacked LogicalNet at the end of 2019, and they were able to move laterally to Albany International Airport's network and successfully attacked it and encrypted its network. And unfortunately, they had to pay a few hundred of thousands dollars so they can decrypt and restore their network as fast as possible. Of course, trusted relationships and supply chain attacks are not the only initial access vector. In fact, as they have quite a lot of various affiliates, they use a wide diversity of initial access techniques. For example, we observed that they partnered with various botnet runners like TrickBot, like IcedID, and QBot. So during our recent engagements, we saw that they used both QBot and IcedID to gain initial access to the target network. And if they are talking about Trojans, such commodity malware, in fact, it can be detected really easily. And usually, such botnet operators, they distribute phishing emails or phishing links to a really wide, to really a lot of different victims. And they can collect some information about infected hosts, and if they have access to an interesting organization, they then can push some post-exploitation frameworks like CobbleStrike or something like this, and then they can, for example, sell them to ransomware operators or ransomware affiliates, or just partner with them and receive a part of ransom payment. Usually, it can be easily detected by various security tools. For example, here you can see how our own threat hunting framework Hardpoint detects QBot. Anyway, in some cases, it may not be detected immediately, especially if we are talking about antivirus software, because if you, for example, take fresh weaponized document with QBot or IcedID and upload it to, for example, VirusTotal, in some cases you may find that there are no detections, or just 1 or 2 detections. Of course, in a day, it may be, for example, 30 detections. But one day may be enough for the threat actor to start moving laterally. And even if you detect it after a day or 2, and then you have no proper response, and you don't do, for example, forensics, or just try to understand based on visibility you have. It depends, again, if you have an EDR, if you have an SIM, or you just have antivirus and nothing else, then you may miss some very important things, and threat actors may be already deep inside in your network, and you just eliminate one host that was infected, for example, with a QBot, and it's not enough. And if we are talking about more threat detection or threat hunting, most of such bots, they just use very, very common techniques. So usually they're distributed through spear phishing emails with attachments or links, then PowerShell or CMD various command and scripting interpreters are used. For persistence, they commonly use scheduled tasks, so it's really easy detectable. Then process injection, so you should monitor on network connections by processes which are not very common to connect to the internet. Of course, some signed-binding proxy execution is also very popular. For example, on the screenshot here, you can see that REG-SVR32 is running a very suspicious file. It's not even with DLL extension, so it's a good detection or hunting opportunity. For example, look for any instances of REG-SVR32 or RunDLL32 running a file without a DLL extension. It's very common for modern commodity malware that's involved in all these ransomware attacks. Very often, such Trojans, on the initial access, they are focused on extracting credentials from password stores. It may be browsers, it may be your Outlook client, it depends. Again, they may have a lot of modules that are capable of extracting passwords from various storages, and then threat actors may use it, for example, to access your VPN. And that's a very common technique. Valid accounts is extremely common when they're talking about all these human-operated ransomware attacks. So let's go further. I think it's quite clear with commodity malware. And unfortunately, pure secured RTP servers, it's still very common, even if we are talking about some high-profile attack, because the world is still under pandemics, so a lot of people are working remotely, and unfortunately, not all the organization they secure properly these accesses. So we still see very often that, unfortunately, the initial access vector was just via public-facing RDP server. For example, in some cases, system administrators, they just pull it for a weekend. They just want to be able to access a server throughout the weekend, so they can access it really easily. And in many cases, a or two is enough of threat actor to gain a valid password for such server by a brute force attack, by a password spraying attack, or by some other means trying to exploit some RDP vulnerability. It's very unstable, but still some threat actors are capable of gain access to such servers successfully using publicly available exploits. Of course, it works very bad, but still in some cases it works. And then it depends. Some threat actors may just use network scanners. They may use some public tools, dump or mimikatz to dump credentials and move laterally. And usually it's a server, right? And most likely, the system administrators, they used very escalated privileges. And that's why threat actors may just scan network, move laterally, or just use PSExec. We'll talk about later how they perform their post-exploitation activities. But anyway, it's really common. So next, explain public-facing application. Again, very common. I already told you about PulseSecure. That's extremely popular back in the day, not very popular nowadays, as many instances are already patched, but still we see even some old vulnerabilities in Citrix being exploited, Microsoft Exchange server being exploited. And what's more important, if you look at this slide, you can see that some of these vulnerabilities are very interesting, because here we have Palo Alto firewall, here we have Fortinet, FortiOS, and FortiProxy. So these are applications that usually they should protect your network from threat actors, but unfortunately, in some cases, they are vulnerable themselves, and threat actors may exploit them and gain initial access to the network. And in some cases, especially with Fortinet, we saw threat actors got really privileged credentials immediately after exploitation. So all they need is just move laterally and even manually deploy ransomware immediately, so they don't need to perform any post-exploitation activities. And even if you have, for example, antivirus software or some other security controls, and you don't monitor anything that's happening in your network, then most likely your network will be encrypted. So, okay, I think it's enough from initial access point of view. Let's move forward. And of course, then threat actors are in your network. Then they need to understand how many hosts are available, how can they elevate privileges, and all this. Some popular tools for network reconnaissance. It may be network scanners, it may be Active Directory recon tools. Advanced IP scanner and source perfect network scanner are very, very common tools. It's not only common for REvil, it's common for many other ransomware-as-a-service programs and their affiliates, especially source perfect network scanner. We saw it back in the day, even during various attacks against banks. For example, when they're talking about Cobalt Group, they really, really loved this tool as well. And Active Directory recon tools. A-Defiant, really popular, used to be really popular with RUG affiliates, but nowadays many of the threat actors use it. AD Recon, SharpHound, really, really common tools that can be easily detected based on, for example, various command line arguments. Even if threat actors run it without any arguments, then, for example, let's look at AD Recon. If you run it without any arguments, you'll see that, well, it creates repos with AD Recon, the file name, so it can be really, really easy to detect. I think there are quite a lot of detection ideas for these tools, so it should be quite easy to detect it in your network, but you should have visibility and you should monitor your network, because in some cases, from initial access to actual ransomware deployment, so time to ransom can be really, really, really short. It can be, for example, 4 hours. And imagine then if we, for example, it's Friday night, and if threat actors got access to your network Friday night, and they need just 4 hours to disable security controls and distribute ransomware enterprise-wide and delete backups, of course. Maybe they would like to exploit some data, but of course, even if they tell you that they exfiltrated, it doesn't mean that they actually exfiltrated. For example, REvil, they have a DLS, and they post a lot of data on the DLS, but again, according to our experience, they really, really often exfiltrate data, but not all the time. In some cases, they just delete backups, they encrypt the whole network, and that's all. They don't exfiltrate anything, because it allows them to shorten time to ransom. Talking about tools, of course, it's really easy to use various post-exploitation tools like AD reconnaissance tools and network scanners, but there is one bad thing for threat actors. They are really noisy, and if you have good detections, then it's quite easy to detect them. So in some cases, they use really simple things. You can use, for example, PowerShell, and they can use some built-in commandlets, and they can use it to collect information about the hosts. For example, here you can see that they collected information about all Windows workstation, the network, and they used no offensive security tools, just built-in capabilities of PowerShell. So you should monitor for such things as well. Okay, credential dumping, quite simple, quite easy, and they have good privileges, and these privileges allow them to use tools. Of course, if the network is not very secure, then it's very, very easy to use Mimikatz or Lasagne, and then Lasagne can be used both to dump credentials from memory, from LSAS, for example, and it can be used to extract various credentials from web browsers and all these unprotected storages. But if they want to be a bit stealthy, then they can use cross-dump. And another thing, as they use various post-exploitation frameworks very often. Not all the time, but still many affiliates use them very often. Then most post-exploitation frameworks, they allow them to dump credentials using just the framework. So they don't need to download more tools. They can just use capabilities of the framework. And talking about frameworks, they use different frameworks, in fact. So, of course, Cobalt Strike. Everybody is talking about Cobalt Strike nowadays because it's quite common. Many threat actors use it. APT groups, state-sponsored actors, cybercrime, of course, ransomware operator. But there are some other frameworks. So you may detect Cobalt Strike really easily because you're really focused and you checked every tutorial on the internet on how to detect Cobalt Strike. In fact, it's not extremely difficult. It can be detected, really, but you should do the detections. You should check if it works fine. You should collect information how exactly threat actors use it. But still, they can use other frameworks. Metasploit, less common, really less common, but still may be used. CrapMap, exec, then PowerShell Empire, really outdated, but still, in some cases, we see it. And in some cases, threat actors use a few frameworks in the same case. Our recent IR engagement with REvil, we saw that affiliates use both Cobalt Strike and PowerShell Empire at the same time because in some cases there may be affiliates, not just one, maybe 2 or 3, because some affiliates may be a team, not just one guy. There may be 2, 3, 4, 5. It depends. Some exploit data, some perform periodic escalation, some perform lateral movement and implant deployment and all this. So make sure you can detect not only Cobalt Strike but also CrapMap exec, even PowerShell Empire, and in packets SMB exec, WMA exec, really common things. Of course, SMB exec is easily detectable, as for example, everybody have Windows event logs, and then threat actors use, for example, Cobalt Strikes, PS exec or PS exec PSH. Then there is an event in system with ID 7045, the same with SMB exec. But if threat actors use, for example, WMIC for lateral movement, or Windows remoting, PowerShell remote, and then you should have more visibility to be able to detect it, because by default it's not written to any event logs, unfortunately. So defense evasion. Of course, some of you may say, okay, my company have antivirus software and I'm 100% protected. Are you 100% sure? In fact, in 100% of incidents we responded to, we saw that antivirus software was deployed in most cases enterprise-wide. But unfortunately, threat actors were able to, for example, put it into detection mode, or, for example, they just turn it off. Usually, during lateral movement and post-exploitation, they may just turn it into detection only, and antivirus software tried to tell security personnel that, oh, it's Cobalt Strike here, it's Cobalt Strike there, it's PowerShell there, it's Metasploit there, and they just did nothing about it because they thought, okay, antivirus software detected it, it must block it, it's some malware I don't want to care about. And the same can be said about some EDR solutions, because threat actors may just disable it. If they have privileged accounts, then they could move laterally. For example, using RDP. We'll talk more about lateral movement a bit later. Then they can just security controls. So that's life. And talking about lateral movement, in most cases, they can just jump from one host to another host, and they can change various settings. And so even if you don't have, for example, remote desktop protocol enabled, threat actors may use various batch scripts, and they can distribute them via, let's say, PSExec, and they can enable remote desktop protocol on lots of servers and lots of hosts, and then threat actors may jump from one host to another. They may dump credentials, they may deploy beacons, they may deploy agents, they may deploy implants. It depends on the framework they are focused on. It depends on their skill set, and it depends on what exactly they want to do. Again, most post-exploitation frameworks, they have built-in lateral movement capabilities. So in many cases, they just need to, let's say, it's cobalt strike, they can just click jump, choose, let's say, PSExec, and choose hosts that they wanted, or just create a batch script and use the same PSExec to distribute it enterprise-wide. Of course, maybe on some hosts it will be detected, but if you, let's say, have 1,000 hosts and on a few hundred it's blocked, they still have a few hundreds with cobalt strike beacon running. Unfortunately, they still focus on data exfiltration. So in some cases, as I already mentioned, they don't do it. But if they are dealing with medium to big business, most likely they'll exfiltrate data. Here is one of recent examples from their DLS. So the link to private lab is not full. So if you even retype it, you won't access anything. But anyway, if you know the address of the DLS, then you can go there and get this information. Exfiltration techniques are quite common. Again, they may use various cloud storages like Miga, like Private Lab. There are quite a lot of, and it depends on the affiliate. And very, very common tool, not only for REvil, but for many other threat actors, is WinSCP. And in many cases, they just install it on the target server and start exfiltrating data. They don't even put the data into archives recently, again, based on our IR engagements. And nonetheless, in some cases, they are able to exfiltrate hundreds or even thousands of gigabytes of data. So if you are focused on threat hunting, using some common tools that may be used for data exfiltration, and make sure you focus on tools that are used in your environments, because threat actors are usually perform various reconnaissance activities, and they know that they are using. And for example, if you are using Miga in your environment, you should not focus on it, because threat actors may use Miga because it's used in your environment and they can use it for data exfiltration. So make sure that, for example, if it's common for some workstation, it's maybe not very common for servers. And finally, ransomware deployment. Again, it may be even deployed manually in some cases, depends on affiliates. Very common approaches are delivering it via PSExec, then everything is disabled, then antivirus software is disabled, EDR is disabled, and the whole network is totally unprotected. So it's quite easy to run PSExec against all available hosts. And of course, group policy modification that can abuse scheduled task mechanism, and they can deploy ransomware via, for example, SMB, and then schedule task that will run this piece of ransomware on every host. And really, really bad news. More and more threat actors started to focus on Linux systems, because many organizations switch at least parts of their environments to Linux. And very important databases, very important systems, they are Linux-based, and usually ransomware-as-a-service program affiliates, they want to encrypt the most critical data, and as most critical data is on Linux nowadays, then they have to develop Linux versions. And already we saw many ransomware-as-a-service programs are capable of encrypting Linux parts of the environment as well. So REvil is not an exception. They introduced a Linux variant recently, so unfortunately, if your Windows infrastructure is compromised and threat actors were capable to obtain credentials to access Linux part of the environment, most likely they will attack it as well. So if you want to learn a bit more about it, and if you prefer reading, for example, you can use QR code on these slides. There is a link to my recent blog post on REvil. So it's a summary of what I was talking about today. And there is another thing. That's our yearly report, Ransomware Uncovered. This time is 2020-2021. If you still haven't checked it, make sure to use the QR code, so you can find a lot of information about various tactics, techniques, and procedures leveraged by ransomware threat actors. And also, you'll have a heat map based on this information. And of course, it's mapped to MITRE ATT&CK. Okay, so that's all for today. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. Okay, the first question is what CVE they use this time. I think it's about recent Kaseya attack. Unfortunately, I don't remember the CVEs themselves, but if you Google Kaseya plus REvil, I think this information is already published, and these zero-day vulnerabilities in this attack, they already have their CVEs. I think the answer can be easily found online. Okay, can we get a copy of the presentation slides? Yes, for sure. So this webinar is recorded. So if, for example, you want to watch it again, some of your colleagues wanted to watch it but missed it for some reason, then they'll get a record via email. I think they can add the slides as well, so no problem. Okay, any other? Okay, now a question from perspective, the new way to improve their wins for the money. So as you can see, they started to target really big companies. So they no longer focus on small ones. Of course, some affiliates do, but recent news, we saw that they attacked Honeywell, they attacked JBS, they attacked Kaseya's clients, a lot of them. they attack Kaseya. So the affiliates became more and more advanced, and as they earn more money, they are capable to attack bigger victims. And we think that that's their focus, and in the nearest future we'll try to focus more on really high-profile victims and on high-profile targets, so they can ask for more, and maybe these attacks are much more difficult to successfully finish, but still they can earn a lot. For example, they got 11 million from the JBS, and because for such giants it's too costly to leave their network encrypted, and for them it's easier to pay to threat actors than to try to recover it from scratch. Okay, I know one case that REvil encrypted files but never asked money to the customer. If this sometime occurred, so they don't ask for money. They don't usually send emails to their victims, for example. Rather, they encrypt network, and you can see that there are ransom nodes, and in the ransom node there is a link to the site where you should copy the key, the personal key for the computer, for the network, and there is a chat there, so you can see the price for decryption. You should interact via this chat, and for example, in some cases people just don't interact with them via this chat, and most likely, especially if this is a small or medium business, I don't think that it will contact such victims. Of course, if they are talking about really big companies where they spend a lot of money and a lot of resources for attack, if victim don't want to contact them, I think they, in most cases, they will contact the victim in some way. But for small medium business, if the victim don't want to contact them, they'll hardly try to contact the victim themselves. Okay, is it possible to respond to ransomware attack on site? What skill specialists must have to do so, and how to acquire them? So first of all, it depends on what infrastructure is it, and on the goals. If it's a big network and there is less to know visibility, for example, you don't have any SIM, you don't have VDRs, so all you have is just built-in tools and built-in logging, and you didn't tweak it, so then you'll have to have quite a lot of various forensics and incident response skills, and I think it's much cheaper to hire some team to perform this job for you, or just have some incident response retainer where you can consult with experts, or just ask them to help on this stage or that stage. It will be very much easier to gain a lot of skills, both malware analysis, both incident response and forensics, and then have such a specialist as part of your security team. If you're small or medium business, it will be too costly. So it's much easier to have a retainer or just to hire an incident response team. How do we know if an attack was conducted by an affiliate or other DICE? Ransomware-as-a-Service program runners, for example, if we're talking about REvil, they don't conduct attacks themselves. They're known to even buy accesses from initial access brokers, so they can provide this to their affiliates, but then affiliates perform post-exploitation, privilege escalation, defense evasion, and ransomware deployment. So, and how to attribute to one affiliate or a group of affiliates to another, it depends, in fact, on their tactics, techniques, and procedures. Because if you are seeing various attacks and you see how exactly this attack performed, it becomes quite easier to distinguish one group from another group. Does REvil have the capacity to deal with all the negotiations from Kaseya victims? What does it say about the Kaseya attack, if anything? I don't think they are negotiating the victims, as there are quite a lot of victims. That's why they just publish this information on their data leak site, and they offered Kaseya or some security providers to negotiate for all the affected partners or clients of Kaseya, and they offered 70 million as a ransom. Of course, it can be negotiated to some smaller amount, but anyway, I think that most of the clients of Kaseya clients, as far as I know, in many cases it wasn't the whole, not the whole networks were encrypted, just a part of them. And as far as I know, most of their clients are trying to just recover from the attack rather than try to negotiate REvil and get some decryption from them. Is there any case for banking company? Yes, it was. And the funny thing is that we even saw then REvil affiliates used unsecured RDP public-facing servers to access a network infrastructure of a bank. Unfortunately, I can't tell you where and when, but anyway. Do you focus on network host detections only for such post-exploitation framework, or are they better detected as the kill chain of several events? It depends on the tool. For example, if you're hunting for, or you're trying to detect something like in packet Cobalt Strike, and there is no penetration test or red teaming engagements in your environment, even if you can detect some usage of Cobalt Strike beacon, let's say, then it most likely is a good sign that you should perform remediation. If, let's say, you are trying to find any evidence of post-exploitation and you found some soft-perfect network scan or something like this, in some cases, such tools are used by network administrators or system administrators. So that's why you should check a number of events before and after, so you can understand if it was legit or if it was not legit and it's related to malicious activities. So it depends on what kind of techniques you are hunting for. To understand the question a bit, what CVEs should most be implemented to prevent ransomware? So if you're asking about vulnerabilities that should be patched first, so first of all, we are talking about ransomware. There are two types of vulnerabilities. So first of all is vulnerabilities in public-facing applications, because it's a gateway to your network, in fact. So if you have some public-facing applications, they are vulnerable, especially if these vulnerabilities can lead to remote code execution or some path traversal, and maybe threat actors may access files where passwords are stored and something like this. Of course, such vulnerabilities must be patched first. Then, if threat actors already in the network, let's say they got access using some some QBot malware, let's say, to some host. In most cases, they need to escalate privileges. And this is another thing. If there are any privilege escalation vulnerabilities that can be used by threat actors and they can elevate privileges just with one click or just one tool, then these vulnerabilities must be patched very quickly as well. Okay, looks like that's all. Okay, so thanks a lot for spending your time with me today. Again, the webinar is recorded. You received a link. I think you received slides as well. If you still have not checked, please check the blog post on REvil and Ransomware Uncovered report. Okay, thanks a lot. Hope to see you on our following events. Thank you. Bye. Have a nice day.